Okay, what we'd like to do tonight is go through the transition process. We want to have a family meeting for good communication. This is not an elders' meeting. No decisions will be made. It's a time to give and receive information. Just like to talk about what we're going to be doing during the next few months in this process. You don't know me very well, so I'll introduce myself and the way I operate. Before I do any meeting, I like to go over the rules. What are the rules? What are the rules? And so we're planning to have an opportunity for some discussion, so we want to go over the rules. Amos 3:3 asks the question, can two walk together unless they are agreed? And the answer to that question is no. If we're going to travel together, we've got to agree. If we're going to Chattanooga together, we have to agree on when are we going, what time we're going to meet, whose car we're going in. We don't have to agree on everything. If we stop at Cracker Barrel, we don't have to eat at the same menu, but we have to agree on some things. Here's the guidelines I want to suggest for our meeting. Do I have permission to lead this meeting? Is that okay with everybody? Okay. Will we speak one at a time? Do we have a right to disagree? Is that agreeable? We have a right to all of our feelings. Can we be mad, sad, glad, scared, or any combination of those? When we're glad, will we agree not to make fun of other people? Is that agreeable? Will each person speak for himself or herself? You know, a lot of times people say a lot of people are upset. Well, who are they? Can't tell you, it's confidential, but a lot of people. I like to have a rule. I'll speak for me, you speak for you, let God speak for God. Is that agreeable? Will we settle group business in the group, or will we get in small groups afterwards and talk about each other? How would you like to do that? You got choices. Is it okay if we settle group things in the group? And then what I'm really concerned about, if I say something that offends you, will you tell me, or will you talk about me to other people? Which way can I expect you to do that? Steve says he'll talk to me. Anybody else? Good. Good. Okay. And you know what I'm not doing? Oh, somebody's doing that for me. Thank you very much. So, I'm supposed to be clicking this, but somebody's making up for my inadequacy. What we're talking about tonight is the transition process. William Bridges was a 39-year-old, frustrated, burned-out college professor. He decided to go out into the woods, build a cabin, and spend a year deciding what he wanted to do when he grew up. And as a result, he became a transition specialist. And he came up with this model, which I found very helpful. Anytime you go through a transition, there are three stages. Number one, there is the ending, the losing, the letting go. It can be death, it can be retirement, it can be a divorce, it can be any number of things where there's an ending and there's something that we're losing. And then out in the future, there's a new beginning. That's just what happens. Somewhere out there, there's a new beginning. In the middle is the key to understanding the whole process, which he calls the neutral zone. And in the neutral zone, we're wandering around in circles saying, oh, me, I don't like it here. If we could just get it back the way it used to be. He said what people really want to do is they want to leave Egypt by crossing the sea, and then in 11 days they want to go at Kadesh Barnea and walk into the promised land, the land of milk and honey, and just skip all that wilderness stuff. He said the only problem is you can't do that. And he said when we're trying to make it like it used to be, it's like people in November picking up a bunch of dead leaves in one hand and a tube of Elmer's glue in the other hand, and you start trying to glue the leaves back on the trees. And somebody said, what in the world are you doing? Well, I like trees with leaves, so I'm trying to put these leaves back on the trees because that's the way I like it. He said, you can't do it. Can't do it. It won't work that way. Now, here's where the hope comes. He says, you don't have to do much during the neutral zone except be sure you don't freeze to death. If during the winter you'll just keep from freezing to death, there is a process that will help us work through a transition. Isn't that encouraging? He said, if you just don't freeze to death, spring will come, the leaves will come out again, flowers will bloom, and there will be another productive growing season. It won't be just like it used to be, maybe a whole lot better. But you'll make it and you'll get through that transition. And so that to me has been very helpful. He wrote a book called Transitions, which describes the process. He wrote another one called Managing Transitions, which he tells groups and individuals how to move through it. And then he wrote another one called The Way of Transitions, Embracing Life's Most Difficult Moments. And here is a chronicle of how he dealt with his wife's terminal illness, her death, and his later remarriage. And here's what's powerful. Here's my mustard seed from the book. As he was going through this, his wife, and they went everywhere. They went to Australia and just went everywhere trying to find a cure. And she died. And he talked about 3 months of inactivity where he tried a few small projects and found being busy felt good, but working also presented with unforeseen new problems. Listen to what he says. All the things that I had written about transition, the very things that people had said were so helpful to them, now felt strangely unreal to me. I wondered, how could I have ever tried to pass myself off as an expert on transition? I felt now that my words had totally failed to match in depth the experience of actually being in transition. Here's what he said. He had practiced this for years and told people how to do it, and he said, I didn't have any idea what I was talking about. I don't know what's going on. But he said after he had done that, after his wife had been sick and died and he grieved and then he eventually remarried, he looked back and said, yep, that's exactly the way it happens. At some point there's an ending, you lose something, you let go. Somewhere out in the distance is a new beginning. But between those two is a lot of wilderness wandering. And notice how the chart goes. It's not Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3. There are many days we'll be in the ending phase, we'll be excited about the new beginning, and we'll be frustrated at the way we don't know if it's ever going to start all over again. Let's talk some now about some of the lessons that I'm going to be presenting. We started this first series this morning on Luke 9:23. So we're going to spend 7 weeks talking about being a disciple of Jesus. We're not ready to look for a new preacher. We're ready to look at ourselves. Are we the kind of people that will attract the kind of preacher that we need at the Central Church of Christ in McMinnville right now? And we'll do 7 weeks of that. After that, we want to do 7 weeks on how to survive the storm and enjoy the sunshine. How do we solve church problems? We want to talk about why do we have problems in the church? And how long will we have problems in the church? And if you'd like to do some homework, that'll be Acts chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. The first complaining and criticism we find in the church, the first church fuss, is in Acts chapter 6, when the Grecian Jews brought a complaint against the Hebrew-speaking Jews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution. And we see the great leadership of the apostles and how they dealt with that. We want to do another series on, I beg your pardon, I never promised you a rose garden, from 2 Timothy chapter 2 on communication. And it's interesting how all these fit together. In fact, the whole Bible fits together pretty well, wouldn't you say? But what we notice in 2 Timothy chapter 2, that good communication is very, very difficult. It is painful. And if I'm going to communicate successfully, I'm going to have to suffer like a soldier. I'm going to have to go by the rules like an athlete. It's going to be very, very difficult. I'm going to have to go, it's just going to be hard. We're going to talk about how to make that difficult situation easier by following the principles that we find in 2 Timothy chapter 2. Now, for several years now, when I work with a church, we sit down and talk about, what do you expect of me? What do I have a right to expect of you? First two churches I had didn't do that. So what I did to start doing that is I learned that from the University of Hard Knocks, whose colors are black and blue and the school yell is ouch. First church I preached, it was their first full-time preacher, and it was my first full-time work. So between us, we shared a lot of ignorance. And not only would we not write down the agreements, we didn't make the agreements. We just kind of started. I don't even know if they wanted me. Brother Tom Holland had been going there for 5 years on the weekend. He thought they were ready for a full-time preacher. He told them. They said, okay. And he said, you need to get Jerry Barber. So I'm not really sure if they wanted me to move or were just embarrassed to tell Brother Holland no. But anyhow, I showed up there. I'd been there about a year. And I said, would it be okay if we take a week off during Christmas? They said, sure, it'd be great. And so the last Sunday we were going to be there before we took a week off, one of the elders got up and he was thrilled. He said, Brother Barber, we've collected some money for your Christmas and we'd like for you to have this. He had collected $30. And Gail said, what are you going to do with the $30? I said, Gail, if it's okay with you, I'd really like to buy a pair of Sunday shoes. Every time it rains, my feet get wet because there are holes in the bottom and they're not worth fixing. She said, I'd like for you to have some Sunday shoes. How are we going to make the car payment? I said, oh, that's in the budget. She said, yeah, but they won't pay us when we're gone. I said, sure they will. She said, no, they won't. I said, yeah, they will. You know, everybody gets a week or two vacation. She said, you wait. Guess who was right? Gail. Wait a week or two, and sure enough, that check never showed up. So I asked one of the elders, what is your policy about preachers having a week or two vacation with pay? And they said, we never had a preacher and we ain't got a policy. And so they had a short discussion, and one of the elders made the wise comment, he didn't do nothing, don't pay him nothing. They said, hey, we can agree on that, and that's exactly what did I learn from that? You know, before you start, it'd be good to agree on things like that. So sure enough, I left there, and the next place we discussed all of that. How many weeks for meetings, how many weeks vacation, if you leave, how long do you have for termination, and all of that. After 8 years, I was in the process of leaving, and one night in a men's meeting, one of the men asked, are we paying Jerry to run around all over the country to find a job? Do we pay him on the Sundays he's gone? The treasurer said, yeah, we pay him every week. Well, Jerry, what about that? How do you feel about getting paid when you're not here? I said, well, according to our agreement, if you wanted me to leave, or if I decided to leave, I'd have 90 days, 3 months with pay, or until I found a church, whichever comes first. We had 3 elders when I came. 2 of those elders had died and wanted to resign. And so they asked the remaining elder, Brother Holly, what about that? And you know what he said? Seemed like we talked about that, but I don't remember exactly what we said. What did I learn from that? Not only do you need to have agreements, but they need to be written agreements. And somebody said, well, back in my daddy's day, they just shook hands, and a man's word was his bond. Well, if that worked for your daddy, I'm proud for him. Written agreements are not for dishonest people. They are for people who forget and people who die. So the only people who do not need to write down their agreements are people who will never die and never forget anything, and you need to be working with people who will never die and never forget anything. So, since that time, I have them written down. I scan it into my computer, do a PDF. It's on my hard drive. I put it in Dropbox. I have 3 external hard drives, swap them out every month, keep one off site, and back up everything else to carbonite and put the original in my safety deposit box. So I think we need to, I don't think it's unspiritual to write down agreements. Evidently, God didn't think it was all that bad. What do we have here? God didn't say, well, y'all just remember what I said. It is written. It is written. Scripture, writings are inspired of God. Remember one time that God made his agreements in stone and did duplicates before they had Xerox. So evidently, it's not unspiritual to write down your agreements. So here's an interim ministry transition consultant working agreement between Central Church Christ and Mac Menville and Jerry Barber. Function, interim minister and consultant. Purpose, to serve the congregation as a preacher and consultant, to work with the elders and other leaders in the congregation to equip the saints for the work of ministry and the edifying of the body of Christ. Responsibility, pulpit preaching. Preaching Sunday morning, Sunday evening. Spiritually feed the flock with challenging, practical applications. Relationship building messages that promote enthusiasm, communicate transition plans, ideas, and processes, help us continue our focus on serving Jesus and others. Teaching. Teach classes on Sunday morning and Wednesday evening as requested. Lead special studies such as Learning to Love My Friends for elders and staff and spouses and others if they desired. Facilitate a leadership class, God's great servants for elders, deacons, and those interested in becoming leaders and cooperating with and supporting present leaders. Observation. In leadership training, what I have noticed in many congregations, we say we're going to have a leadership training class. And what we do is we look at 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, and generally the most exciting part is when you argue about how many kids you got to have. We need to be concerned about the qualities of leaders, but that's not leadership training. Here is what I think. I think if we're going to train for anything, we need to be sure that there's some pain injected into the process. We need to get out of our comfort zone. You don't win Friday night's football game by putting all the team in recliners and let them play video games Monday through Thursday. They got to get out and hit and practice and practice and practice. So we'll have a class called God's Great Servants. We'd like to have every elder, every deacon, every man who wants to be an elder or deacon, and everybody who doesn't want to be, because if you're going to have great leaders, you need great followers. And so we'll take about an hour and a half on Wednesday nights for 13 weeks, and we'll practice. We'll have a big group, and we'll do part of our study in that. We'll look at leadership prayers, leadership principles, and leadership practice. We'll divide that big group into small groups. Each one will be an eldership. I'll give them a situation and let them discuss how we're going to handle the situation. Responsibilities with staff. Help build teamwork and unity among all staff. Lead staff meetings. Challenge them to grow spiritually. Work with the ministers, keeping them involved and informed and part of the solution. We had a staff meeting this week to decide when we're going to have staff meetings. So although we didn't really have a staff meetings, we decided when we were going to have them. We're going to have them on Wednesday morning at 9:30. So if you call between 9:30 and 11, there's a good chance you'll get the answering machine. We'll be back when we get through. We do 3 things in staff meetings. Number 1, we'll study the Bible. And so we'll start on a book of the Bible. Each week we'll read a chapter. We'll discuss that. We ask 3 questions. What did I learn about God? What did I learn about people, human beings? Number 3, what do I need to do as a result of what I've read? Number 2, we will coordinate. What do we need to be doing? What's due? What does this person need to be doing? How do we need to do that? When do we need to have our material in for the bulletin and other things that need to be done? Number 3, we'll do leadership development, and what we'll do is read a book that has to do with leadership and how the church works. We'll be reading a book by Peter Steinke called Healthy Congregations. Now, we won't read very much because one of my philosophies is try not to learn very much. We'll be reading about 3 pages a week. I think a chapter's way too much. I don't want to try to learn that much. So we'll read about 3 pages and talk about that. Relationship with elders. Aid to build a relationship and trust between elders and the congregation. Help with communication to the congregation, keeping them informed and updated. Assist with formation and administration of a search committee. Lead a weekend workshop, New Shepherds Orientation Workshop, soon after beginning with elders, preacher, and spouses. That's something I've been doing since 2013. Henry Wilhoit from Fairlane Church called me that fall and said, we've just appointed 5 elders and 4 of them never served a day in their life. Do you think you could put something together to let them know what they're getting into? And I said, I think I probably could. So he has a cabin in Gatlinburg, and we went there and we spent 6 hours on Friday, 6 hours on Saturday, and that went pretty well. And so I've done 18 of those since that time. And so we'll do 12 hours together off-site, and then we'll have a graduation on Sunday morning and let each of them share a mustard seed that they learned over the weekend. And I'll do my best to help us all feel uncomfortable part of that time, because that's leadership training. What will we do? How do we work through those things? Number 5, serve as a consultant and training for the Preacher Search Committee and Transition Monitoring Team. Meet with the elders at regularly scheduled meetings or at other times otherwise requested to serve as a consultant and resource person. Share thoughts, ideas, suggestions, and new possibilities, all with the understanding that the wastebasket exists. I've told these elders and every eldership that I've worked with, if you'll let me come and work with you during the interim, I'll give you every weird idea I've had in the last 59 years. Any of it you don't like, feel free to use the wastebasket. Just throw it away. It won't hurt my feelings at all. Have an honest, open, responsible, respectful relationship with the elders. Provide evaluation of our relationship, giving both strong points and those needing improvement. Other. Organize and facilitate a self-study to learn who we are, who we'd like to be, and what we should expect in the next preacher at this church. I'll say a little bit more about that. Serve as a connector between elders, deacons, ministers, and congregations. Be available to meet and talk with members and non-members. If requested, perform weddings and conduct funerals. Interact with many in the congregation, both individually and in groups, to make this time of transition in the church and occasions for individuals and groups to learn about change in their lives and to see opportunity to growth. Generally assist with keeping of set goals and objectives. Be open to suggestions and comments. This next one, it took me 50 years to get this into my contract, but it's one of the most stress-relieving things I've ever had. Here it is. Any criticism of Jerry Barber will be directed to Jerry Barber, and it will be welcomed. I love criticism. But Jerry Barber does not accept anonymous criticism. Isn't that powerful? Many times during my ministry, Jerry, a lot of people are upset. Who are they? I can't tell you, that's confidential. A lot of people are upset. Something I've observed by negotiating and writing down agreements. The reason you do that is to prevent conflict before you have conflict. But the fact that you talked about it, agreed on it, and wrote it down doesn't remember that everybody always remembers. Remember about name memories? I know how to do it, but I forget it sometimes. So a time or two since I've had this agreement, I've had an elder and said, Jerry, we had a person or two that didn't like, who is it? When are they going to come? Oh, I forgot all about that. They're supposed to come. Yep, tell them to talk to me. That'll be great. Isn't that wonderful? One eldership got so excited, they said, man, this is great. This takes a lot off our plate. How would it be when we get our new preacher if we had that in his contract and also had that any criticism of the elders would be directed to the elders and they will welcome it? And so if somebody comes to the preacher and criticizes the elders, he say, they meet on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock. They'll be glad to talk to you. Man, isn't that great? And then, I don't know if they did it or not, I say, wouldn't it be great if we had another paragraph where it applied to all the members, and that all criticism of any member of the church would be directed to that person, and I wouldn't carry any messages for them. And we'll talk more about that. We'll talk about that. Additional responsibilities and assignments is mutually agreed upon with the elders. Preacher-church contract, the salary will be so many dollars paid when and how. And we talked about whether to give you the number. I don't mind doing that. Here's my rule. Been doing this 13 years, and so every time I get with a church, they say, we don't know how much to pay an interim preacher. I said, I've got an idea too on that. Would you like to hear it? And I thought a lot about this. We went through our training in 1998, 99, and we didn't start till 2007, so I tried to anticipate some of this, and here's what I came up with. To work with this congregation as your interim preacher, pay me what you paid the last preacher. Is that fair? Works for small churches, big churches, medium-sized churches. Just pay me what you paid the last preacher. You need somebody in the interim position that's as good as the last preacher was as your full-time preacher. I was working with one congregation, and they were wondering about that, and I said, I don't want to brag, but I believe that I'm one of the 10 best interim ministers in churches of Christ. As far as I know, only 3 members of the church have gone through training, so surely I'm in the top 10. Secondly, there's a good possibility that you will pay your next preacher more than you paid your previous preacher. A lot of times that happens when a preacher stays a long time. I don't know and ask or don't really care about how that's gone, but a lot of times the elders will say, well, we've had a pretty tough year and we can't do a raise this year. And what that does is gets a church behind, and so when you get ready to look at the next preacher, you get sticker shock. And so you need to keep a place in the budget so you'll have enough for the next preacher, and so I agree to help you with that while I'm here. I'll hold that place for you. And so I understand that you come out with a full report. I don't mind you knowing how much I make, but that's the agreement that I would make with the last preacher. Here's the first time this has come in, and I'll tell you why. Central agrees to give Jerry a W-2 form with the total compensation minus the estimated housing allowance in line 1 and the estimated housing allowance in line 14. Well, why'd you put that in there? Because I've suffered pain by it not being done correctly. Last year I went through a full audit of 2016. And one of the problems was they did not put my total salary minus the estimated housing allowance in line 1 and the housing allowance in line 14. And so I sent about 5 3-ring binders to them that I had to copy off. They sent me a letter and said, we'd like $6,700 and some odd dollars. And so if I could prevent that, I'd like to. I received my first check this week, and I'm impressed with the specificity by which it was prepared. It seems like, I was told this, and I'm already experiencing that. You have people doing an excellent job with that. Number 3, a truck to move bed and other household items will be furnished. Jerry will be allowed 1 week off each month to hold meetings or workshops or for vacation time. He will have 2 days off per week to use as he desires. Jerry will use the preacher's office while he is working at Central. Jerry will do some of his study at home. However, he will be in contact with the office and will be available during regular work days. He will leave contact information on days off as well. And home is right across the street back of the building. The length of our work together will be 6 to 18 months. It could be shorter if the elders find a preacher before that time. I'm here, but we got an agreement. Anytime the elders tell me to go, I go. I was talking with my friends and relatives here tonight, and one of the great things about interim ministry is job security. I can't get fired because I've already quit. Man, that takes a load off of it, a lot of worry off of you. So, anytime, be fine. Number 9, either party will give a 90-day notice for terminating this agreement. The 90 days start from the Sunday the new minister is announced. Let's suppose that we go through the whole process and we're looking at getting a preacher. You get a preacher, and I've only been here 10 months. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to tell me today's the day we tell you when the new preacher. And you pay me for 3 more months. I'll either work or not work, whichever you tell me. Really what I'd rather do is work. In transition, there needs to be a good time of saying goodbye. So generally what we do is we spend 9 months getting to know the people and 9 months telling the people we've gotten to know goodbye. We'll see you later. Number 10, key to interim ministry. It is understood that under no circumstances will Jerry W. Barber consider or be considered as the next full-time preacher for this congregation. Any changes to these agreements will be made only after discussion of all parties involved. And so that is the way we have agreed to work. Let's go to Sunday night workshops. One of the things that I look forward to are our Sunday night workshops. I've already told you what a workshop is, and generally I try to do that the first Sunday if we can get it in, if not the second Sunday. We'll just tell everybody we're having a workshop. A workshop means it is a very practical sermon which you can use in your family, in the church, in business, and on softball teams, anytime where people get together. And I encourage people to make multiple applications of the lessons that we study. Also, if it's a workshop, you can talk as long as you want to because it's not a sermon, it's a workshop. And just up front, our first workshop I plan to be is how to accept, invite, and enjoy criticism. This is one of the most helpful stress-relieving principles I've ever dealt with. There was a time when I dreaded it, but now I love it. Please criticize me. I like it. I'm going to do the very best job I know how to do as the interim preacher while I'm with you. But you know what? Lord willing, I'd like to go somewhere else after I leave here, and I'd like to do better the next time than I did this time. And if I'm already doing the best I know how, the only way I can do better, somebody will tell me, here's a way to do it better. So tell me how to do it better, and I'll say, thank you, thank you, thank you. That one will be about an hour and 15 minutes. And so I'll just tell you, and we'll warn people that morning if they come back, it's their fault. But it has really been helpful to me. And incidentally, the way I got that is reading through the book of Proverbs and looking at all those verses on reproof and instruction and correction. It's just full of it. Another one that we've hinted at briefly is a lesson on love. One of the most overused, abused, misused words in the English language. Love is not a feeling that you feel when you feel you're going to get a feeling that you never felt before. We want to look at what the Bible says about love and what we're commanded to do. And then we'd like to come back and talk about criticism again. How to hear criticism to make you a better person. Sometimes criticism can get to be toxic. What if you do is someone is being overbearing and ugly and destructive? What do you do with that? We'll look at 2 verses and 2 chapters in Proverbs, and look at Matthew chapter 5 and talk about how to deal with toxic criticism. Then we'll want to have a lesson on funerals and parties. I believe that to have a good family, a good church, any good group, we need to have a lot of funerals and a lot of parties. We need to have good, specific, meaningful endings to anything that we do. We need to know how to say goodbye. And then we need to have a time and celebrate the good things that we do. In Acts chapter 14, when Paul and Barnabas came back from that first missionary journey, they came back to their sponsoring congregation, and they declared how that God had given His grace to them. They stayed a long time. But he wasn't retiring. He's got missionary journey number 3, missionary journey number 3, his trip to Rome. But he took some time to say, look what God has done with us. And they rejoiced over that. We'll talk about that and how to do that. Another one, when you look in the mirror, do you like the person that you see? We generally come across to others on the way we like ourselves or don't like ourselves. Are you building your life on facts or fairy tales? Again, another principle that's been helpful. There are usually 3 stages in any relationship. If we recognize that, then we're not disappointed when we're disappointed, because step number 2 in any relationship is disappointment. That's normal. That's normal. Honeymoon, disappointment, reality. When I know that, I don't get scared. Sure, I'm going to be disappointed as long as you're dealing with human beings. And who would want to have a close relationship with someone who's not a human being? So it's going to happen one way or another. Another one is making good grades in the University of Hard Knocks. Jesus, one of his main methods of teaching was looking at something and say, what did you learn from that? There's no reason to ever be bored, because something is always happening, and we need to be thinking, what'd you learn from that? What'd you learn from that? What'd you learn from that? If you want to know about the kingdom, watch a man farming. If you want to learn about the kingdom, watch a woman making homemade bread. If you want to learn about the kingdom, go fishing. That's Matthew chapter 13. And then I may or may not get to this one, some things I've learned from running. I've learned a lot of lessons that have been helpful. And then here's one that I like, how to have a good fuss. When people come in for counseling, sometimes they're fussy. And sometimes I've had them to get very vocal and use some words that I wouldn't use in the pulpit. And I just sat in my Cracker Barrel rocking chair and listened and let them go. And finally they said, we've been pretty, and I said, wow, this is great. This is wonderful. Y'all really love each other. I am encouraged. And they say, what? I said, yeah. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. And if somebody is very angry, that means they value that relationship. Now, I hope you never quit fussing, but I'd like to be your fussing coach. And so let's talk about how to do it a little bit better. Now let's talk about some of the projects that we want to be doing. We'd like to do a timeline, and Frank has already been working on that. We would like some more people to do that. We want to get the averages for the attendance as far back as the records go. And then we'd like to put that all on a graph, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night contribution. And let's just see what's been happening at the Central Church of Christ as far as we have records. And then what did you learn from that? What did you learn from that? Now, these things that I'm about to discuss, we have clipboards with sign-up sheets. And so we need some people to volunteer for all of this. We need some people who will be willing to do some of the averaging and put it on a chart, and then we'll make a big chart and look at it. Another special project is the transition monitoring team. Transition monitoring team taps into the grapevine of the church, and we just try to find out what's going on. I'd like to have 10 volunteers tonight. Would like to ask not to have more than one from a family. And so we'd like to have 10 volunteers who say, I'd like to be on the transition monitoring team. I'm asking the elders to nominate 10 people to be on the transition monitoring team who had not already volunteered. We'll meet once a month for 60 minutes. I'll set the watch, and when time goes off, we'll leave. We'll have a secretary there to record it, and here's what we'll do. The first 20 minutes we'll say, what are you hearing? What are people saying? What are people asking? What are people losing? What are people fearing? What hopes and dreams do they have? Sometimes, I don't know how it is here. I just got here. I don't know anything. And may not know a whole lot more when I leave, but I don't know anything right now. A lot of times, elders are not aware of all that folks are saying. And so we report this. We don't tell who said it or who reported it. We just say, here's what people are saying. Here's what people are saying. The second 20 minutes, we read Bridges' book, Transitions, and each month we talk about what mustard seed did you get out of that chapter. And if we can get these 20 people, and we can, Incidentally, you don't know me very well, but if you knew me, what would be your guess that we'd do the first meeting? Anybody have a guess? Go over the rules. We'll take about the whole hour going over the rules. A lot more detail than what we did tonight. In addition to this, we'll have several more. One of them will be what we say here stays here. Confidentiality and what all that means. But we'll read the book and we'll say, what mustard seed did you get out of that? And then the third 20 minutes, we will say, how are you dealing with this transition and other transitions in your life? And as we develop trust, along about months 3 or 4, people will start sharing and saying, well, this is kind of like what's going on here. This is like that. And we'll begin to cross-pollinate and learn from what we're learning. Or I'm learning what happened in my life about what's going on in this congregation. Another project, we need some volunteers. Really, 2 or 3 people will probably do this. We need somebody who is familiar with SurveyMonkey, or another instrument, if you like that better, to do a self-study. We need at least 50% of the attendants to fill out this self-study. There's 64 questions. 61 of them are yes and no's, 1 through 5s, that kind of thing. And then there are 3 open-ended questions. It takes about 45 minutes, maybe an hour to go through it. And SurveyMonkey will record all of those and graph them out, and we'll be able to see how people view the church. Everything from demographics, how far do you live, how long have you been here, when do you plan to leave, what brought you here, why are you staying, what do you believe about creation, what do you believe about salvation, and then how do you evaluate our worship, how do you evaluate our cooperation, our work with each other, and then several sections on what kind of preacher does this church need at this time. What are we really looking for? See, before you look for something, you need to know what you're looking for. If you don't, you won't know when you find it. And so what is it we need? What are the qualities that we need in that next preacher? So we need 2 or 3 people who will work on this. The elders will work through all the questions and put that on SurveyMonkey. And then for the people who don't like computers, we'll do hard copies, hand those in, and then somebody will feed that into SurveyMonkey and we'll get the results. And one of the things we'll do with that is send that to the prospective preachers. The more we know about each other, the easier it will be to find a good fit. We want to find out everything we can about them, and we want them to find everything they can about us. See if we fit. We're not looking to hire a good preacher, period. We're looking to hire a good preacher that fits Central Church of Christ in McMinnville, Tennessee in the year 2020 or 21, whatever year that happens to be. And another project that will be helpful in the preacher selection is introduction. This says introduction to Eddyville. That was my first interim. But introduction to Central as a church, introduction to McMinnville, introduction to Warren County. And that helps the preacher decide, is this the kind of place where I want to move my family and live for the next 15, 20, or 30 years? See, you need to know. Everybody not happy everywhere. I went to one church where the man was a good preacher, he was a good minister, everything was just working great, but they didn't have a Walmart, and his wife couldn't be happy without Walmart. You can find that out before you move. See, I was impressed when we came and they invited us to spend the night and look over town. We found Walmart and Papa John's, and we said, man, we're going to make it here. It's going to be great. And so we're just thrilled. You even got some other stuff here. So, when we say amen, we need folks to come up and sign up for these things. Probably 6 or 8 people, whatever we want to do. Tell all you can about the church, and a lot of that will be in the survey and the timeline. Tell about educational, medical, recreational opportunities in the area. The first one, they did a 3-ring binder in congregation. Since that time, we've done it digitally, so we can put all those links together and they can learn all about it. I like rules. And so I've come up with the 3 main rules for the preacher search. Rule number 1, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. This is the first commandment. Second rule for the preacher's search, the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And a very good rule that I try to practice and encourage everybody else, as you would that men should do to you, do you even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. The last church before last, the fellow who was working on the introduction, he said, Jerry, what all do you want me to include in the introduction? And I said, I want you to include what you would like to know if you were the prospective preacher and thinking about coming to Saxton, Missouri. What would you like to know? And if you would like to know it, he'd probably like to know it too. And that's a good rule to follow. Just do what you want other people to do if they were in your place and you were in theirs. And one of the reasons I put that in there is because, and we'll talk about this in the search process, many people lose their Christianity during the preacher search. One of the most disappointing things that has happened to me as a preacher in the last 59 years is this. I'm trying out with a church, I'm discussing with a church, I go visit, I go talk for a long time, and they say, we're going to talk about it, and we will let you know Tuesday night at 7 o'clock. We'll call. And when I was living in Dalton, Georgia, I say, is that Central Time or Eastern Time? And I'd get out my day timer and write it down. And I'd tell the kids, this is before cell phones, got a real important call coming Tuesday night at 7 o'clock. If any of your kids, any of your friends called at 6:45, say, Dad's got an important call, call you after that. And 7 o'clock would come, and 7:30, and 8, and 9, and no call. I said, well, they'll probably call Wednesday night, and I tell the kids, may have an important call coming, so you can't talk to anybody. If anybody calls, say, Dad may have an important call coming. And then Wednesday night, and Thursday night, and Friday night, and many times I'd read in the Gospel Advocate who they had hired. That ain't right. When you tell something, do what you promise. And we need to be Christians during this. You can't suspend Christianity during preacher searches. All righty, that's about all I got to say. If anybody needs to go to a missions meeting, you're free to go. Questions, comments, observations. Anybody have any questions? Anybody? I've talked fast and I know I haven't covered everything. What would you like to know? What have you always wanted to ask but never did have the opportunity? Anything. Anything. Anybody? Thank you very much. We're looking forward to our work together. We got a lot of work to do. Be sure and come up and volunteer for what you would like to be involved in. We need the workers. And let me tell you what I think happened. Let me tell you about the survey. I think it is a good parable for the whole process. It is very important to do this survey so that we can see what people are thinking and what they are considering. It's important to let the prospective preachers know what we expect and what the makeup of the congregation is. I think the most important part of the survey is what goes on in the mind of the person who is filling out the survey for that 45 minutes. I believe that one of the most spiritual things that a person can do is to think. And some of these things are designed to help us to think. Thank you for thinking and for staying, and we need to talk privately. We can do that as well. Thank you very much for being involved, for being interested enough to be here. Let me know how I can be helpful, and please criticize. Thank you.